Hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you back to my channel. Thank you very much for finding me and thank you very much for subscribing if you do. I post every week on a Friday about growing cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia without any grow lights or a greenhouse or humidifiers or any equipment, just me and them indoors or outdoors or not at all. So plant lovers of the world, if that is your bag, do hit subscribe and follow my continuing adventure, which today is all about our small friends. Yes, plant lovers, what I find myself in the possession of is a lot of miniature orchids or small orchids with tiny flowers. And I just have to wonder why. Yeah, because, it's a curious thing. I do like to see the flowers that I have spent much energy trying to nurture into bloom. Anyway, I've got a collection here of things that I've just realized over time are tiny. Anyway, I've been filming them when they're in bloom, thinking that I kind of put it all together when they were not in bloom, but this one has actually stunned me by doing a second flush of flowers. So it seems like it's a great place to begin. Now this one is called Stelis porschiana, as you can see there. So why don't we step back in time and look at me rambling on about this one. Plant lovers, so two more small flowered orchids and bit of a story about one of them. But anyway, let's put that one aside and we'll just focus on this one for the minute. Look at that. Now the leaves to me look very Masdevallia-like. As you can see, there are no pseudobulbs, so it's one of those sorts of plants that does not like to dry out. But look at those flowers. So on each spike, there are many flowers, and the top ones haven't opened yet, and it's absolutely covered in them. The only thing is, they're a little dull. I mean, yeah. It just so happens I was just making a follow-up video about this dendrobium, and I have to say, I do like a flower with a bit of oomph that you can actually see. Anyway, I just don't think miniature orchids are really for me. But anyway, let's talk about this one particularly. Now, the name I was sold it as is Stelis porschiana, as you can see there. But it has many other names apparently, but I think the accepted name by Q is Stelis papaquerensis. So this one is found sort of across the top of South America, in rainforests up to a reasonably high altitude, and so it's considered a cool to warm grower. I'm growing mine outdoors all year, undercover, protected from the rain, but it gets quite low winter minimums, down to 2-ish degrees centigrade, you know, about 36, 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Here in the inner city of Melbourne, obviously it gets colder in the outer suburbs, but our minimums tend not to get close to freezing in Melbourne. And happy as Larry. It is, I'm filming this in late spring in November, and as you can see, covered in blooms, and it is a springtime bloomer, so there you go. And this group, most of the Stelis are epiphytes, as many orchids are, so it is in a loose, free-draining mix. I haven't repotted this as it seemed quite happy in the pot it was in. You know I don't love plastic. I will repot it, probably once the flowers are finished, and I will pot it in not a hugely larger sized pot. Like Masdevallia and Pleurothallis, an orchid type that doesn't want to get dry because, as we said, no pseudobulbs, so it can't store water. Other than that, it's fairly easy. It's in fairly lowish light for me. It's on a sort of an undershelf, so it gets sort of dappled light. It gets a bit of dappled morning light, but it's generally much more on the shadier side than other things. And look, happy as Larry. The other interesting thing about these flowers, I mean, they're as tiny as all get out, is that they're photosensitive. So they only open in sunlight and they close at night and if there's no sun. I wonder what that evolutionary trick is all about. But anyway, the flowers themselves, if you could see them, kind of interesting. They're sort of like a shamrock. There's sort of like three elements to the flower. Anyway, a curious thing. And the name Stelis comes from Greek, the Greek word for mistletoe, because these are epiphytes, and the Europeans who first found them decided perhaps it was mistletoe-like. Anyway, so Stelis. And that kind of makes sense too, because it is apparently one of the first American species orchids to find its way back to Europe in 1591. So very hot to trot. Off it went the minute that the conquistadors raced through South America. They took some orchids back, and this is one of them. Quite amazing. It may have disappointed its European botanists when it finally arrived, but nonetheless, it's a curious thing. odd flower, odd plant. I honestly can't say I'm in love with it. It might be one of those things that, you know, space becomes an issue. It gets thrown out with the bathwater. But anyway, not literally, obviously. I'll pass it on to a good home. But yes, very floriferous, kind of curious, not huge, doesn't require a huge amount of sunlight or care particularly. Just keep it moist. Don't let it get too burnt by the sun, and off you go. It can take fairly cool temperatures. Not a difficult plant. Feeding wise, like many other orchids, I give it a topical dressing of slow release fertilizer in spring, and then, you know, every 3 or 4 waterings, something in the water, whether it's an orchid specific liquid fertilizer or something like worm juice or seaweed based solution. Always dialed down to sort of 1/8, 1/10 of the recommended solution. Other than that, pretty low maintenance. So there you are, and goodness, it is just covered in flower spikes again. And I wonder, is it because, and in fact there's a little flower that's just opened there already. I wonder if these were yellow or pink or white or blue, not that they would be, maybe just if you could see the flowers more, you'd actually, I would enjoy it. Anyway, there's that one. And then in that same video, I also talk about this baby, which was sold to me as a Restrepia, which it certainly is not. Anyway, let's go back and look at the video and see what this one was doing then. All right, so let's move to this one, which is a bit of a scabby looking thing, isn't it? Goodness me. Although this spike has dropped its flowers, but this one hasn't. So we'll look at this. Now, this, I'm a bit cross about, plant lovers. This was sold to me as Restrepia wageneri, as you can see there, by quite a reputable orchid dealer here in Australia. I shan't name and shame, but anyway, I made a little short about it, and thankfully some of my very cunning and clever viewers pointed out that, yeah, it's not a Restrepia, it is Pleurothallis stricta. The Restrepia has much bigger, more colourful flowers, so I was kind of looking forward to that. This, can you see it? Yeah, no. That is a tiny flower, and it's a tiny plant. Anyway, it's more visible than the Stelis here, but nonetheless, I think obviously perhaps if you've got a good specimen of it and they're all in bloom, it's going to look fantastic. But anyway, it flowers from the leaf, from new growths, and this has sort of just struggled for me a bit. Now this does like more shade than this plant, and again likes to be kept moist. Again, no pseudobulbs, so it's quite obvious it's going to need watering. Now this one is found in Colombia and Ecuador, and it grows at much higher elevations. So on paper, it should be able to take colder temperatures than this, but they both seem quite happy outdoors in Melbourne all the time. And this is a real understory plant, so much more shade than this one. And I've got it in the shadiest position I could find. I'm not sure if that is actually sun damage or whether it was like it when I received it. It's a division, and when I did receive it, it was a little scabby. Not the healthiest of things. These are the 2 leaves that have grown for me, which of course are healthy and fabulous, and they have bloomed. And apparently this can bloom twice a year, in winter and summer. And right now it is November in Australia, which is the very end of spring. So it is neither summer nor winter, but this has bloomed. There we are. 2 of my orchids with tiny flowers. And as I have said perhaps before, just not a lover of the tiny inconsequential flower. Now I know a lot of people collect miniature orchids because they are kind of unusual, and you can obviously deal with the space issue. If you don't have much space, miniature orchids are great. Anyway, let's see what else we've got to look at. Yeah, jury is really out on that one. Another tiny beige, somewhat dull flower. I wonder what their pollinators are. What the pollinators are attracted to. Certainly not colour and not fragrance, because they have no colour and no fragrance. Anyway, but talking of colour, look at this. This is absolutely beautiful, is it not? And it is a Promenaea xanthina. Look at that. And I think this might be, I made a video about this before, and I think some of my viewers thought it was a hybrid rather than the species. Either way though, look at that fantastic, beautiful gold flower with a sort of deep burgundy speckles. Now, this is described as a small / miniature orchid, and the flowers are relatively small, not tiny, but they're a bright colour. So it's going to produce over time this mound of flowers. Now, in the year that I've had it, it's grown huge amounts. And as you can perhaps see here, and I'll come in and show you closer, that the new flowers grow out of the apex of the leaf at the base of the pseudobulb, which has just matured. So similar kind of growth habit to Oncidium orchids. All of this growth here is new. So I'm thinking next year I should hopefully have the most amazing mound of golden flowers. So very happy with this one. So in the realm of the small orchid / small flower, this one works for me because you can see the flower because of the bright color. And then talking of bright color, look at this. And I happen to be wearing the most perfect color to balance it out. That lovely sort of pink magenta. This is Sarcochilus ceciliae. And this is a species Sarcochilus. And it grows from higher altitudes than the other Sarcochilus that I have, and it flowers in midsummer. And it is now late January in Australia, which is midsummer. And as you can see, really, really, really tiny flowers. But again, they are this lovely, quite bright pink. So you can see them. And look at the size of it. I mean, it takes up that much room. It's so small. Now, they do get a bit of a bad rap about being so easy to kill, and I was thus quite frightened of it and have literally left it to do its own thing. It gets bright indirect light, it gets bright morning light. I don't water it much at all in winter because it's prone to root rot, and it's kind of almost just perching on the top of the medium, which is medium bark and large perlite. So it seems to be happy as Larry, and there's actually a secondary growth coming out of the bottom. So it's great. 2 spikes again this year. I had 2 spikes last year. I've made a video about this before, which I will link. And I have a whole Sarcochilus playlist, which is about largely Hartmanii and the Hartmanii hybrids, which are all very much early spring, late winter, early spring harbingers of the season, whereas this one is definitely a summer bloomer. But takes up no space, is incredibly low maintenance, and has a really pretty visible flower. So this miniature baby is definitely a keeper. Which then brings us to perhaps one that isn't. Now this is a Masdevallia, as perhaps you can see. It is Masdevallia floribunda. This is a species Masdevallia. Now the strange thing about this is that there is a chain of hardware stores in Australia called Bunnings, so like Home Depot or B&Q's, exactly the same kind of setup. And they used to sell plastic tubes with seedling orchids in them. The suppliers changed now, so the plants are a bit bigger and packaged differently. But anyway, a couple of years ago, they had lots of those tubes of orchids, and a lot of them were species, which this one is, which is where I got it from for $8.95. Now, as you can see, its growth is actually looking quite Masdevallia-like in terms of its size, but it was much, much smaller when I first bought it. So these leaves have really grown beautifully. Now, it flowered for me last season, and I'll drop in the bloom. Yes, tiny, inconsequential, beige. What do you do? The hybrid Masdevallias are so pretty and visible, and I guess that is the point of hybridization, is it not, plant lovers? To produce bigger flowers, more of them, with fragrance, etc., etc. So I've just been drinking that hybrid Kool-Aid, haven't I? Disappointed with species flowers, but only in this case, because I do love other species orchid flowers. Anyway, who knows, as this develops into a bigger specimen, having that sort of ring of flowers, it could be quite beautiful. Once again, it's on a little darkish shelf towards the bottom of my grow space, takes up sort of no room. It's growing where not much else would, and it seems happy, great leaves, and it's blooming. So there you go. Typical Masdevallia care. They are a cool grower, but today it's going to get up to 30 degrees here, which is about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to be hotter over the weekend. But my Masdevallias seem to sail through that weather. They don't get heat stressed. I give them a good hose down around about so that the area is cool and humid on those really hot mornings, and then see what happens. And then our last cab off the tiny rank is this, which is a plant called Gomesa radicans. And radicans, as a suffix, means that the plant can grow along the top of the soil and drop in roots. So many plants have that suffix, radicans. So it is a real creeper. And since I planted it, it has really started to show its creeping tendencies. Now, I'll drop in a picture of this flower. Yeah, tiny. But because it's sort of in the Oncidium alliance, it does have quite large spikes with lots of flowers. So although they are tiny and the whole plant is small, there are quite a lot of flowers, and they are that sort of whitey cream color with a bit of green. So they are actually quite visible. So it's quite pretty and quite seeable, even though it's a small plant. So yeah, this one again is in a more of a low light area. So it's not really taking up prime growing space. And again, happy as Larry. So this one again, I think in terms of our miniature orchid journey, is definitely a keeper because you can see the flowers. Well, there you are, plant lovers. There is a romp through my orchids, and I've just realized that this one and this one came from the same grower. I went to an orchid sale, and you know, you get overexcited, and I'll put a link up here as to, I made a video about the unbagging actually, those orchids. And you know, you go to a sale and you're so excited and you're with your phone trying to Google to see what the flower might look like and the grow conditions. So often you don't get a sense of the scale of the flower because you're so in a rush to buy and the bloodlust of orchid collecting comes out in you. So it's only later that you think, oh, I have got an orchid with a really tiny, indescribable beige flower. There you go. What do you do? Sometimes you just have to be ruthless. Anyway, so far, you know, they're not taking up much space, literally, because they're miniature. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are on tiny orchids. Now, I know it's quite a collectible field and people are quite passionate about them. So if there's anything you think I should look at that does have great color, that might be available in my climate, that works in my climate, do put it in the messages below. Love to see what other people are growing on the small side. Obviously, the great pluses are if you don't have much room, miniature and small orchids are obviously great because look, they take up so little room. The other thing is though, we just need to work on the flowers, I think. But there we are, plant lovers, from my miniature friends. Thank you very much for finding me. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Do hit subscribe if you want to know what my continuing adventure might be next week. It might be something a little more positive and encouraging. Not that this is negative, it's just observational. Anyway, wherever you are, whatever you're growing, I hope you have fun, take care, and I look forward to seeing you next week.